We're going to go to Matthew chapter 5 as we kind of keep rolling forward here in the Sermon on the Mount. We are almost halfway through this first chapter of the 3 chapters that comprise the Sermon on the Mount, this great sermon that has been taught. And if you think about it, it is really the seed out of which all of Christianity winds up growing. It is at the beginning of the gospel accounts as the way that things were sorted out. The church fathers, when they decided Matthew would be the first gospel in our canon, put this as the first significant words of Jesus right here. And we're studying them. That's kind of the priority they were given. We're studying them, and yet I wonder how often we've ignored what Jesus says. And so I hope that today this is something that challenges us, that causes us to dig deeper. Had some great conversations after the first service about this with folks, and I hope that it is something that for us really, really can dig into our souls, so that we will live as people who belong to the kingdom of heaven, to the kingdom of Christ, instead of just everybody else, kingdom of this world. So let me ask you if you notice this. This is an opinion that I hold. Don't know if you share this opinion with me or not. I feel like we live in a really angry world. Do you think so? People seem more mad than ever before, and many times it doesn't take a whole lot for that anger to burst. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't know if it's that we're living really fast, or we're, got a lot of stress on our plates, or we just don't recognize the way that this feeds on itself or whatever, but we are more ready to go to blows over the smallest things. Somebody cuts somebody off in traffic, they want to pull out a gun, and this is crazy. I don't know how we got here, but we live in a really, really angry world. And I think, we can all say what are the causes of that and how did we get here or whatever, but I really believe that the biggest question for us is, what about our anger? What about what's going on inside of us? So I want you, if you would, to think of the last time that you were really, really mad, like really angry. I'm not saying maybe anybody else knew. Maybe you did a great job of putting on a mask and nobody knew that you were mad. Or maybe everybody knew that you were really, really mad. Maybe you broke some things, or you said some things you shouldn't have said, or did some things you shouldn't have done, and now there's fallout from those things in your life. So think about the last time you were really, really mad. And then I want to ask you this question. How many of us spent time in prison for being really, really mad? How much time did you get for that anger? It's just kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, what? Go to jail for being mad? Everybody gets mad. Here's the thing. If I said to you, there's this person and they killed somebody, it was murder, and they went to jail, you'd all be like, yeah, that's justice, that's right. But anger, that's just an everyday, to me, that's like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5, it's every day, right? The thing about it is Jesus, in this passage, says that anger and murder are the same. What? What do we do with that? How do we process that? Matter of fact, through the rest of this chapter, he says things that we really don't know what to do with. So we just kind of and he said, Jesus is awesome, and he's just really teaching, and it's amazing, but I have no idea what he meant. So I just kind of keep going till I get to the Lord's Prayer in chapter 6, and then I'm back on track. Then I'm good, because I'm back, to stuff I know. Jesus says, murder, and what do we do with that? We never make the connection. We just kind of move on. Later in the same verses, we're only going to look at 2 verses today. He compares murder to treating people like they don't matter. I would use the word disdain for that. Treating someone like they're nothing, like they are valueless. And Jesus says that is also the same as murder. It puts you in real life or death problems. As I thought about this week, this story came to mind, and I hadn't thought about it in many, many years. And I don't know why this story sticks out to me, but it just does. Maybe there's a reason. But when we were younger, we were in a youth group at a little church, a little country church. And we had a youth group of about, I don't know, a dozen, maybe 15 people, kids in that youth group. We were at the younger end of it, like 7th and 8th and 9th grade. We were down in that end of it. And there were some older kids who were the big teenagers. And some of them drove and you had cool vans and things like that. And, when you're a middle schooler, those are just like, wow, cool people. So it was a small church and kind of a family type church thing. And so my parents were really close with some other parents whose teenagers were in the youth group with us. It was a brother and a sister. The sister was like a year older than my sister, and the brother was a couple years older than that. And so they were the older end of the youth group. But they were over our house one day playing, and as we were playing wiffle ball out in the street in the front of our house. My brother was pitching, I was catching, and the older brother was batting. And he hit the wiffle ball, and it came back and right at my brother, right at, like whistling at him. And it hit him in the back. He turned, and it hit him right in the back of the calf. And this giant red welt blew up on the back of his calf. And, he fell to the ground in pain, and oh, are you okay? Are you okay? And he got up, and he was like, yeah, I'm, 7th grade kid. You're like, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good. No big deal. Especially with the older kids around, you didn't want them to think that you were weak, right? And I'll never forget, the sister of the brother who hit the ball came over to my brother, and this was a little bit out of character for her, so it was shocking that she did it. She was very concerned about my brother. Let me see your leg. Oh, let me see your leg. So my brother stood up, and he kind of lifted his leg up like this, and she took it in her hands, and she was looking at it. She's like, oh, that looks like it really hurts. Does it really hurt? And he was like, yeah, it really hurts. And she went like this. Bam! And hit right on that welt with all of her might. And then she laughed like it was the funniest thing ever happened in the world. And everybody else who was playing started laughing. And I just was like, did she just do that? Who does that? Right? And so, we're the youngest kids out there. So Brian looked at me. I looked at him. We kind of were like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do here. And I thought about how in that moment, what bothered me was, it was like my brother was just there for someone to have fun. It didn't matter that he was hurting. He was just there for someone else. She treated him like he was nothing, And I tell that story not because it's some major event, but because it happens all the time. You guys have dozens of stories like that in your life, where people treated other people like they were nothing, right? Like they didn't matter to them. You were just there as an opportunity to step on you so he could step up to something else. You were just there because you were a resource that would make their life easier or whatever. And we do that all the time. Jesus uses some words here that talk about when you treat someone like they don't matter, he equates it to murder. And I don't exactly know how we process that stuff when you hear that. So let's think about it. Let's dig into this. Because as this first part, there's going to be 6 of these different ways that Jesus makes these comparisons. As the first one, I'm hoping that we will tune in and we will allow the Spirit to teach us in this and learn something from it. So I want to read verse 21 to you, which is kind of the start of it, the setup of it. And it says this. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder.' And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." All right, so we all recognize "you shall not murder." That comes out of a listing of rules in 10 Commandments. You shall not murder, right? We all get that. And so here's Jesus, and what I want to point out to you so that it makes sense as the rest of this goes on is that Jesus is using a teaching form that they were very familiar with. He's standing in front of this crowd on the mountain, and he starts off like almost every rabbi of all time would start off. He says, "You have heard. You have heard." So he's going to refer to a rabbi, a teacher, a prophet, a famous writer. He's going to refer to that, or he's going to refer to the Talmud or the Torah, the scriptures of the Jewish people. He's going to say, "You have heard. It has been said." And so he does that. He says, I want you to hear what you've been told before. I'm going to refer to that. And because that is authoritative, I'm saying it with authority. But in every one of these things, Jesus does something shocking. Because he starts off with, you have heard, but then he ends with, or turns to, but I tell you. That was stuff that didn't happen. That's why they said he taught as one who had authority. See? Because he didn't say, well, Rabbi so-and-so. He said, I tell you. They were like, whoa, that's different. You tell us. How do you get to tell us? He taught like one who had authority. And Jesus goes through in each of these things and starts off with something you've heard, and then he adds to it, or he expands it out from there. So as we look at this and all of these things that are said, here's what happens. Jesus takes a bunch of dynamite and blows up what Christians and the people of God have defaulted to thinking about rules. And I hope that you and I will take to heart what Jesus says so that our thinking about rules will line up with what Jesus thinks. Because what Jesus does here is he says, if you will hear what I have to say to you, if you will believe what I'm telling you, it is the end of believers living in pride. Thinking you're better than other people. Looking at how your life is going and someone else's life is going and thinking they're worse than you are, judging other people and being self-righteous. In fact, Jesus goes beyond, as he talks about these things, the actions, and he goes down to the unknowable realm of our heart. He says, you think you're okay because you haven't crossed this line. But I'm telling you, you're not okay because your heart is the same as people that you would condemn. Jesus is saying, you think the law saves you. You think that knowing the right things to do and doing them and knowing the wrong things to do and avoiding them is what makes you okay with God. But I'm going to tell you, you could not be more wrong. I'm going to show you that rules do not save you. Cannot save you, because in the end of it, your performance will never save you. Now, this sounds like terrible news, but this is the beginning of the gospel. This is the beginning of the greatest news you have ever heard or ever will hear in your life. Your performance won't save you. Your performance does not make you better than the person next to you, in front of you, behind you. Your performance, your driving skills do not make you a better person than the person in front of you in traffic who's making ridiculous decisions about what they're going to do. But we live as though we are better in our attitudes and our hearts. Your knowledge, your understanding, your experience does not make you better than your boss who's making ridiculous decisions that affect your life. You see? Jesus says what we think about our performance, putting us in a better standing, really is a wrong place to place our confidence. And so what he's going to do is he's going to call us to live differently than this world. Not differently in how we act. It's not that shallow. He's going to call us to be different from the depths of our soul. A change of heart. He's going to say, when you become a child of God, when you become a child of the King, when you belong to the kingdom, you've been rescued, you've been redeemed, you've been saved, you've been washed. You are different. And you are different not just in how you do. You just don't have all the rules and I'm going to do the... You are different from the very core of who you are. And live like that. He's going to call us to live like that. And these words that he gives us are pointing to the same thing the law pointed to. Where is righteousness and where isn't it? And so he says, you have heard it said to people long ago, the Jewish people, you shall not murder. The 6th commandment out of the 10 commandments. It is interesting today in America that Christians have often taken the 10 commandments and posted them in front of courthouses and town halls. It's very interesting to me because the whole point of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount here is the 10 commandments aren't going to work. It's not that they're not right. They're absolutely right. They are holy and righteous. They are the perfect boundaries for the things that they talk about. But Jesus' point here, don't miss this. Jesus' point here is laws don't fix people. Because laws can't fix the actual problem. Believers, I hope you get this. In this political climate in which we live, where everybody wants to go campaign for a better law about whatever, better laws don't fix people. We know what does, don't we? So let's not fall into this trap. Jesus says, understand the 10 Commandments don't go far enough. You shall not murder. He's not saying the law is wrong. He's saying you've missed the point when you take it simply at face value and just say, well, I didn't kill anyone. Well, at least I didn't kill anyone. That doesn't help. It's not transformational. He's not contrasting you shall not murder with the other things. He's just saying you shall not murder was just a litmus test. It was just a token. It was just the start of what I was trying to point at. I think we all know what the problem is with rules. Number one, a rule is put in front of you and there is a part of you that's like, oh yeah? And that part of you starts to ask the questions about all the gray areas, right? Well, where's the loopholes? How can I get around this? How can I get through this? How can I make sure that I can still do what I want and not get in trouble? How can I hide it so no one sees it so I won't get in trouble? Right? And so you shall not murder. He's not talking about all killing. He's not talking about capital punishment. He's not talking about war. There are arguments to be made on those sides in other areas, but that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about going out and taking anger out, vengeance out on someone else, taking their life. Well, what if I didn't mean to? Well, what if it was an accident? All this gray area. When the rules are your hope, you have no hope. Because that's what the Jews did. They had the Torah, which is the Old Testament, the books of the Old Testament, the first 5 books, the law. Then they had the Talmud, which was the interpretation of all those laws. So you should not work on the Sabbath. What does that mean? Well, you can't walk more than 3/4 of a mile. You can wash your dish, but you can't wash your pitcher. You can cook bread, but only unleavened. Like, they had all these rules. What does it mean to not work on the Sabbath, right? And that's what you do. When your hope is in the law, you have laws, and then you have laws upon laws upon laws. You spend all your time trying to define where exactly the boundary is. Jesus didn't come to give you a whole network of rules. He came to make you new. He came to give you a new heart. He came to give you deep redemption, salvation. And so here's Jesus saying to them, the 10 Commandments don't work because they don't go far enough, because there are rules. So the law is good, but it isn't our hope. He's looking at a group of people that think they can tell who's accepted by God and who's not accepted by God by how they act, by what they do, by even what they're wearing. In this crowd, wherever the religious leaders are, wherever the Pharisees are, they dressed differently. They wore their hair differently. They walked differently. They carried themselves differently. And all of that was meant to and did have the impression on the rest of the people that those people know God, because they kept the rules. When God said, keep these laws upon your forehead, and they would actually write down the 10 Commandments and put them up on their forehead. Literally. So they took this serious. They took the rule keeping seriously. But Jesus is looking at this crowd and saying, you've all missed it. It was never about the rules. The rules had a function, but it wasn't to save you. It was to show you that you needed to be saved. Too often churches buy into this whole rule thing. Well, you got to do this and you can't do that. And if you want to be a Christian, you have to this. And you have, like, the rules are going to somehow get us what Jesus said it will never get us. And we give ourselves credit for the stuff that we do right, and we give ourselves excuses for the stuff we do wrong. But Jesus is taking dynamite and blowing that whole idea up. Just like more righteous laws won't fix our culture, more righteous laws will not fix us, because they don't reach the heart. It is devastating to fix someone's behavior without a transformed heart. For someone to think that they're okay because they kept some rules, but not actually be okay because they're still the same. So Jesus has this whole presentation where he says, you have heard it said, you shall not murder. And we would be like, okay, well, what is murder? And where does manslaughter lie in that? And is this a sin? And what if that happened? Is this a sin? He skips over all of that, and he goes to something so much more practical. I doubt that many of you have struggled with murder. I just want to kill. I mean, not we say it, but I don't mean that you struggle to not kill people every day. I don't think that some of you after the service, I would like, hey, come, I'll pray for you if you have needs. Here's prayer cards. Come tell us what you want us to pray for. And somebody writes down, please pray. I've been struggling not to murder people this week. Like, that's just not our thing, right? And because it's distant like that, it feels like, okay, that's over there. We've got ourselves pretty good. We're good. Well, Jesus makes it so much more practical. He goes well past this idea of murder and how far away we feel from that, and he goes right to where we are. So look at me at verse 22. He says this, but I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of hellfire. Jesus is about to show that rule keeping can make you feel safe and secure while you are profoundly missing the mark. He uses some shock value here to show us that this is really serious business. And before we get to exactly what he says here, I just wanted to point this out. Don't miss the main point. Your performance doesn't measure up. You are not good enough to earn God's love. Can we all agree with that? Your performance fell short. Your performance has marks against it. Those marks you cannot erase by doing well. Jesus is making this point. You think that you're okay because the law says don't murder and you haven't murdered. But I'm telling you, you're still not okay. The law was never meant to give us a roadmap to success, a pathway to God's love, to God's acceptance, to God's favor, to being a child of God. The law was meant to show us that we will fail, always. It was meant to show us that we have problems. If we continue to try to use the law to make people good, if we continue to try to use the law to make myself good, we are doomed to fail. The law does not have that kind of power. Rules do not have that kind of power. You know what rules do? They make you look across at someone else and say, well, at least I didn't do that. Man, how could you? I would never. The law is the thing that makes you watch a TV show and somebody comes on that has done some horrible thing and you're like, oh, why? They don't even deserve to live. The rules are what make you feel better than someone else. When Jesus says, you're no better than them. Who are you going to believe? You're going to believe the rules because you didn't cross this line, or you're going to believe your Lord who says, you got the same problem as they do. And so let me read it again. It says this, but I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Wow. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. That's the forbidden thing in human realm. That's the rule. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Both of these, you shall not murder and you should not say this word Raka, are the rules that men are keeping. He says it's worse than that. Because you think you're okay because you're not going to go to court. Nobody caught you. You're not, nobody's discovered your problem. You didn't do anything that was against the law, so you think you're okay. But Jesus says you're not okay. The idea of the law, the idea of the Ten Commandments was, it was meant to show us the kinds of things that indicate a heart that is wrong. Okay? So let's say physical well-being. You get sick for some reason. You've got symptoms of being sick, right? The problem is not your symptom. The problem is what's causing your symptom. So if you have a fever, your temperature goes up. If you could get your body temperature down, you haven't really fixed the problem, right? Because the fever is coming from something. So that's the actual problem. Sometimes symptoms don't show up until well after you've had a problem. You've had the problem, but the symptoms show up well after that. The symptoms are not the problem. They tell you there's a problem. The law was meant to show us we got a problem. That we cannot keep ourselves on track. That we are too selfish and self-involved, self-centered, and we will always step out of bounds. Jesus said, I came to give you a new heart. I came to make you a different kind of people. I called you to follow me. And so it means when life unfolds, our question is, what would our king do? What does our king think about this? So I step into conflict in relationship, and it's like, well, what does Jesus think about this? When I fail, well, what does Jesus think about this? When people hurt me or betray me, or I hurt other people betray, well, what does Jesus say about this? It's a different way of interacting with life. It's not about borders of laws. It's about a heart that follows our King. It's serious stuff. It's so serious that we're going to look at next time what he says to do, a reason to leave a church. So we'll pick that up next time in the next couple of verses. But the connection between anger and disdain and murder is one that I hope that we can make today. Because anger, being the same as murder, or dismissive words and attitudes making us in danger of hellfire, is sometimes a pretty big thing to try to swallow. But let's think about how they are alike. How is anger the same as murder? How is disdain the same as murder? Well, let's start with this. Behind murder is anger, right? Behind murder is disdain that other people don't matter, right? And Jesus is saying, well, you eliminate a specific word that represents disdain, raka. It doesn't change the heart or make other words that say the same thing better. You still have the same problem. Murder is the ultimate action of me first, right? I matter more than you. My way matters more than your life. My desires are the highest priority. Murder is an expression of that, but so is anger. Anger, especially directed at another person, comes from that place where it's like, but this is about me. Frustration, rage, all of that stuff comes out of me first. Self-centeredness, a confidence in my desires, a confidence in my will and my way. And it's coupled with pride, that I actually matter more than other people, that I am more important than they are, that they are less than I am. Pride. Self-centeredness and pride. And Jesus is condemning a heart that acts just like a murderous heart, with a complete disregard for the welfare and value of other people. And think about it. You probably have seen this. Can't you destroy people without killing them? Well, at least I didn't kill them. Destruction, sometimes it's worse. The destruction that echoes through their life and then spills out into other people's lives because of the way that you treated them like they were nothing, the way that you abused them or poured out anger on them. Right? And you've seen some of that stuff, the devastation that comes through the types of attitudes and actions that Jesus condemns, but we dismiss so easily. I wonder how angry are the people of God and what we do with a king who says, you will face judgment when you are angry with a brother or sister. Jesus says, I tell you, anyone who is angry will be subject to judgment. When you think about it, probably this great sermon that Jesus gave, if it isn't challenging to me, I've probably missed the point. It's probably not that challenging not to murder, but it's really challenging to look carefully at my anger. It's really challenging for him to expose to me how much more I need to grow into his image. I probably won't get there with the 10 Commandments, right? Because the 10 Commandments might keep me from doing some wrong things, but they don't change my soul. Why is anger so serious? Because it's so destructive. I think today in the church, we need to have this very clear understanding. Anger towards others does not have a place in those who follow Jesus. And yet it is a normal part of our lives. Why are we so flippant about it? Living angry, Jesus is saying, is not fitting, not Christ-like, not right. And this anger is anger towards others. It is a self-centered, selfish anger. A refusal to forgive, a stoking the fires of hatred and rage. It is a decision to stay stirred up. But what does it do? It destroys people. It destroys connection. And what matters to the king? Community. Love your brothers as I have loved you. connectedness, relationship. And anger wrecks it. Anger damages it. Men, I've said this before. I will say this again to you. Men, I think a lot of times we don't take full account of what our anger does to those that are depending on us, those we're supposed to protect, those we're supposed to love. And you might give yourself credit for you didn't hit anybody and you never were going to. But listen, some of you need to start accounting for the damage you've done through your anger to people that you love. I'm not saying women don't have a problem with anger, but I think men are more blind to it overall. And I'm saying, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you got to believe what James, the brother of Jesus, said. Man's anger does not work the righteousness that God desires. James chapter 1. It is useless. It is powerless, even as it convinces you that you are strong. It is not to your credit that you didn't hit someone. If you destroyed them just the same, it's the same. Raka, when Jesus says that, it is a word that doesn't really translate well into English, but it's a word that just means empty-headed or idiot. It is a word that they had a rule that you can't say that word because it is so dismissive of somebody. It treats them like they are worthless. So they would just say a different word that meant the same thing. Because they could keep the rule, but they could still be proud. They could still be self-centered. And so there's this despising people, this looking down on people. How big of a deal is it for God's people to look down on others? Well, first of all, let me say we do. As a community, we do. We treat people like they're not as good as we are because they have some problem in their life. So we do. But secondly, how big of a deal is it? Well, our king, what does he think about people? He died for them. So he thought they were really valuable. He gave everything for them. And so if I'm going to treat them like they're nothing, when my king treats them like they're really valuable, we're out of sync. It is not fitting for the people of God to act like people who've been made in the image of God, people for whom God sent his son to die, are worthless or pointless or just a problem. What this does is it starts to say, if you're a child of God, the problems that you have are a you problem. They're not the people around you. They're not the circumstances around you. If you're living frustrated all the time, on the edge, just about to boil over all the time, that's not the result of your life. That's the result of your soul. That's the result of your heart and the choices that you're making there. And Jesus says, let go of it. Give up on it. If everybody is dumb, if everybody's in your way, if everybody is a problem in your life, if there are people around you that you find real easy to just say they are worthless, the problem is you. That's a you problem. And you need to start dealing with it. This is what Jesus is saying to you. Are we following him? Because if we are, I think we got to start taking some of this stuff seriously. I think what Jesus says is, you're worried about the court. They will be held accountable in the court. But I'm telling you, your Creator's opinion matters more than the court. And your Creator's opinion is much more complete. The court can only judge an action that it has a rule about. Your Creator will judge your soul as whether it's righteous or not. So this is hard, isn't it? You might even say it's impossible to do this. I would say you're right. It is. As a matter of fact, if we think that we're just taking this too far, the end of the chapter, verse 48, he says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. In case you missed the point, be perfect. So how many people are on the road right now to being perfect by keeping the rules? How many of us are like just about that? Yeah, we're already sunk, right? It's over for us. This sounds like terrible news. It's actually great news. Because here's the thing. What he's saying to us, first of all, is if you're a child of God, your soul resonates with this heart, with this idea of living, with this way of looking at people and treating people. It does not excuse what is disconnected from God inside me. Instead, it pursues a connectedness with God that makes me live like Jesus is calling me to live. And so it stretches me, it grows me. I don't excuse my anger problem. I say, Lord, take it from me. Show me where it's coming from. Show me where I'm blind to it. Help me to fix the damage I've done. Help me to treat other people like you treat people. Help me to talk about them and think about them and love them like you love them instead of treating them like they're not worth my time or my energy or my effort. It stretches me, it grows me, and we should be responding to that like Jesus is calling us to. That's one. But the other thing is this. Even though my performance will never save me, I can still be saved.